It's World Environment Day tomorrow, and the focus for World Environment Day 2023 is on plastic pollution. We know that our use of plastics is a problem. It's been a fantastic discovery and resource for us, but we've become over-reliant on it, and it is harming creation. We know that plastic litter can kill wildlife. We know that it doesn't easily rot down in the soil, and so there's tons of it buried, and it's just staying there because it won't rot down. The ocean and the life within the ocean is becoming increasingly polluted with microplastics. In things like facial cleansers and stuff, there's often a sort of gritty feel to it to help you scrub, and that's often tiny pieces of plastic that just stay in our oceans. Plastic is now going to become part of the Earth's fossil record. It will just stay there. And if in several billion years people come to dig it up, or somebody comes to dig it up, they will find evidence of this plastic still there. We know that our actions have consequences, and we know that we often cause damage. And as Christians, we have a really deep sense that this is wrong. We have a deep sense that actually we are called to live differently. But we don't always have the time to perhaps reflect more deeply on why it is that we should be caring for creation. And I could go on for a little while about this. I've written a few essays on it for college, and I get a bit excited about it occasionally. But I am also aware that it's getting near lunchtime, and my son's got a birthday party, so I have to make sure I keep it short. So I thought this morning we'd focus on, I just wanted to invite you to reflect on how we can appreciate the natural world and how that in turn can point us to God. And how we can recognise that our role is within creation in the worship of God. I spent ages trying to think of a reading for today. I knew I wanted a psalm, but I couldn't pick which one because there are so many beautiful passages of poetry that I could have chosen in the Psalms. I decided against Psalm 104, which is one of my favourites because it's quite long. But also, I kept finding these lovely sections in the Psalms related to creation, but then they start going off talking about the law, or talking about sin, or talking about how Israel had fallen away. And I was like, I just want the nice, beautiful poetry. And then as I kept reading through more, I kept thinking, well, no, maybe there's a point here. Maybe having these passages about the law alongside these beautiful bits about creation, maybe that's meant to be there for a reason. So maybe I need to accept that. So I finally settled on Psalm 19. Let's have a little look through it together. What page was it, Linda? 640 if you want to follow along. What an opening. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. Beautiful description of the skies, the heavens. And you can almost, as you read it, imagine David standing under a stunning starry night sky, excitedly declaring whatever the Hebrew equivalent word of wow is. Those first few verses, you get a sense of awe and wonder from looking at the beauty of creation. And where does it leave David? It drives him to praise. In the splendour of the moon, stars, and sun, David sees God's handiwork. I love the imagery of the heavens speaking without a word, declaring God's greatness just through their being where they should be. They glorify God who created them, and it's a reminder to us that we should do the same. And the line at the end of verse 4, it's often written sort of sitting between verses 4 and 5. That says God has made a home in the heavens for the sun is important. In many ancient religions, things like the stars, the sun, were deities, they were gods. Particularly things like in ancient Egypt, there was lots of, the pharaohs and the sun were depicted as gods themselves. But here, David is very firmly asserting that the sun, something so powerful that nothing can hide from its heat, is still only a part of creation. It's God who put the sun in its place. God is the real power, God alone. We also get a beautiful description in verse 4 of the pattern that the sun takes, the rhythm of its rising and its falling. These deep rhythms that the earth follows are quite comforting to me. I was reflecting on this recently as I was paddling in the sea. Last week, my family and I took a trip to North Wales. And as I paddled, I found myself being quite soothed by the sound of the waves lapping against the beach. That sort of slow rhythm. It was beautiful there, and the sea was gorgeously clear. So clear that as the waves kind of crested over and crashed, you could see through them and see into the sea beyond. And as I spent more time on the beach, I began to notice the tide slowly rising, the beach slowly disappearing and changing. And I knew that after a while, it would slowly reappear again. It was peaceful because I was allowing myself to stop rushing around and simply enjoy being there in the moment. But more than that, it was comforting because I was reminded of the fact that the universe is really complex, it's really intricate. There's all these things in place that have particular timings. But it's all been given a role by God. I'm not in control of everything, and I don't need to be in control of everything. I don't need to be busy all the time. God is at work. And sometimes I need to remember just to be still and to let God be God. Then in verses 5 to 13, we've got this section where David moves on to describing the law. No, we don't. I've written the wrong thing. It's from 7 to 13. The instructions of the Lord are perfect. The decrees of the Lord are trustworthy. They are right. They bring joy to the heart. They are sweeter than the finest honey. And he describes the Lord just as poetically, just as reverently as he does creation as the skies in the first few verses. I imagine that for some of us that might seem a little odd. It certainly does to me. It doesn't seem quite natural to talk about laws and regulations making us go, wow. But clearly here, the instructions, the law, are driving David to praise just as much as a starry night sky. David recognizes that the law is given by God, that these commandments are there for his flourishing. And this is something that we spent some time thinking about recently when we did the sermon series on the book of Deuteronomy. I wonder when the last time you thought God's laws were sweeter than honey was. David finds following God to be life-giving and freeing. The law's not supposed to be a heavy burden that we drag with us through life. We are supposed to find joy in seeking out God's will. Just as God has set the sun on its course and orchestrates the tides, God has also given us our place. Our individual roles might be varied. We might all have different gifts, strengths, and weaknesses. But ultimately, just like the rest of creation, we too are to proclaim the glory of God. And this is where I think I take my starting point when I think about environmental issues. I am part of God's marvellous, wonderful creation. I was made to join in with the whole of earth in worshipping God and pointing others around me to God. And so when my actions cause damage to other people or to the environment, I'm also somehow interrupting the praise that God truly deserves. As you go into this next week, I encourage you to spend a little time in awe of God's creation, even if it's a tiny weed growing through the cracks of the pavement. And ask yourself, how is this pointing me to God? Are my actions pointing other people to God? Am I finding my place within that song of everlasting praise, as our communion service often refers to it? David, being the poet that he is, I think sums it up best in the final verse of this psalm. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen.